Hello and welcome to the Score Boord podcast. I'm your host, Rivka Boord of Jets X Factor, the home of the best New York Jets content on the internet. We'll cover all things Jets here, incorporating the analytics you won't find anywhere else. So today it's February 23rd. It might not be that time by the time you're listening to this. We have a lot going on. NFL Combine coming up. A lot of speculation going on every day. More things coming out about the salary cap, about different players, franchise tag, different things like that. So let's get right into it. The first thing I wanted to discuss is just the Jets' backup quarterback situation. I posted an article. I don't know if it posted yet, but it will probably by the time you listen to this, talking about who the Jets' ideal backup quarterback is. But let's go back for a second to last offseason, because I remember all throughout the summer, and really as early as, really from the end of the previous season, saying the Jets need to get another backup quarterback, and Zach Wilson should not be their second quarterback. And the thing is, I was saying it April, May, post-draft, June, July, basically up until the regular season, that the Jets needed to get a different quarterback. And now everyone's talking about it as if it was so obvious. Of course the Jets should. What do you mean? We were all talking about it. I don't know. I follow a lot of Jets YouTubers and Jets people who speak about different things. A lot of them were saying, not a big deal. At the time, like, oh, it's fine. If Rodgers gets injured, we're done anyway. I heard a lot of that. So I would say to some of the Jets people, anyone who has recordings available or videos available of what they said previously, go back and check if you ever said it's not such a big deal, because you probably did. I heard it from a number of you. And so it is revisionist history. For me, I have an article out. I have multiple articles out talking about how the Jets needed to get another backup quarterback and that Zach Wilson couldn't be their backup. So obviously this offseason we all know, and the Jets know, that Zach Wilson can't be their backup. They're probably going to try to trade him. So who should the Jets' backup be? Now, the answer is not as obvious as you think, because, there's so many names out there and everyone wants this one and that one and the next one. Let's talk a little bit about the different options and which ones really are good options and which ones aren't. So this list needs to start with Jacoby Brissett. Obviously was on Washington last year, was on Cleveland the year before. Brissett, I think, is the Jets' best option. I'm just not sure how much he's going to cost, because if he's getting a 1-year, $8 million deal done. If you're already going, $7-8 million, if you're already going 10, that's a lot for the Jets' backup situation. So I think Brissett is the best option. I've heard some fans say, he has a 22-30 career record. He's not that good. I don't know. The last time we saw him over a full season was in Cleveland, where he ranked in the top half of the league in most metrics, including yards per attempt, turnover-worthy play rate, adjusted completion percentage was a little below average, not terribly. Pressure to sack rate was above average. Second in completion percentage over expected. 10th in EPA per dropback. 19th success rate. Those are probably more than confident to be starting quarterback numbers in the NFL, especially considering some of the poor quarterbacking that went on the field. Jacoby Brissett could have easily been taking the Jets to the playoffs with those numbers last year. And so, he wasn't ideal under pressure, but he wasn't terrible. He performed fairly well out of structure, at least when on the run, not necessarily out of the tackle box, but he was in the top 11 in the league in many metrics when he was on the run. Also good numbers to look. The Jets saw him in 2023 when he was on the Commanders. He also had another week where he brought them back. The other game where he came in a game that they were losing big and brought them to within one score. Brissett is the Jets' best option. He's, again, before 2022, he wasn't necessarily any great shakes. He only averaged 6.6 yards per attempt, completed around 60% of his passes, higher turnover-worthy play rate. But overall, and yes, he did have a comfortable situation in Cleveland. Great running game, solid pass protection. But still, overall, he has the biggest track record of success as a backup and should be the Jets' number one option to acquire. Now, he may want to go to a place where he has a better chance to start. If he does, then the Jets need to pivot to the next option. And now most people would put Gardner Minshew in the same category as Jacoby Brissett. I will not put Gardner Minshew into that category. I put Tyler Taylor as the Jets' next best option. And look, I covered the Giants for Big Blue View this past season. I don't cover them anymore, but I did cover them, so I watched Tyrod Taylor play. Not saying Tyrod Taylor was a leader or anything, but what you saw from Tyrod Taylor is the ability, even with trust me, if the Jets' offensive line was bad, the Giants' offensive line was a wreck. They gave up 85 sacks last season. Taylor got sacked plenty, but what he was able to do, you saw from Daniel Jones to Taylor, is he was just able to make the offense look competent. They were able to move the football. They didn't score a ton of points. The Giants didn't have a lot of playmakers, but they look competent. Taylor has one of the lowest turnover-worthy play rates. I think he had the lowest in the league this past year, 1.2%. He still with a 9.1 average depth of target, which was the third highest. So he manages to push the ball downfield. He threw a very pretty deep ball this past year. And despite the Giants not having any major receivers, and he makes the offense work. He doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. Yeah, he's going to take his sacks. He can still scramble. He's not a big, a huge playmaker or anything like that. But Taylor is definitely, I think, the Jets' second best option. And the thing about Taylor is I think he'll cost more in the $6 million range, which would be excellent. So now Taylor, the one thing you have to worry about is injuries, because he got injured this past year against the Jets. He got injured in 2021, missed 6 games. Obviously, the fluky punctured lung that he had that made him lose his starting job to Justin Herbert. But still, recent history of injuries. But Taylor, even at entering his age 35 season, he is still probably the Jets' next best option. I would put him more in the same tier as Brissett. I would put Gardner Minshew a tier down, primarily because I think Minshew had a pretty decent situation in Indianapolis. Pretty decent running game, pretty decent pass pro, and yet he, 6.7 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 9 picks, 3.8% turnover-worthy play rate, 27th in the league. Negative 1.6% completion percentage over expected, 29th. Negative 0.07 EPA per dropback, 20th. 42.1% success rate, 24th. I'm not necessarily. I just think Minshew's turnover-worthy play rate is really the main reason that I would be wary about signing Minshew. He specifically under pressure, he had a 7.4% turnover-worthy play rate, which was 34th. The last thing the Jets need is a guy who's going to turn the ball over under pressure. And yes, pressure rates, pressure numbers tend to be fluky, but still, he generally his overall numbers turnover-worthy play rate 3.8%, a lot higher than you would want it. So Minshew to me is a tick down, especially because Minshew is probably going to get the same amount of money as Brissett. He might also want to go to a team where he could possibly start. And yet I just don't think he's necessarily worthy of it. So for me, give me Brissett and Taylor, and then next is Minshew. Now, after Minshew, then I think we start, a lot of people like Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill had a terrible year in Tennessee. Yes, it was not a great situation, but still, 3.8% turnover-worthy play rate, 78.5 passer rating, 4.6% turnover-worthy play rate when not under pressure, worse than the league. And the reason, and that to me is particularly concerning, because if you're turning the ball over that much or putting the ball in harm's way that much when you're not under pressure, that's pretty bad. Pressure tends to be variable, but when you're not under pressure, it tends to be stable. Entering his age 36 season, this could just be the end of the line for Tannehill. I would stay away from Tannehill if I could. I would prefer Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston to a Tannehill, even though they both have their issues with turnovers. Mariota throws terrible deep balls. Jameis Winston was not great with deep balls his last full season. There's a lot not to like about Winston Mariota, but I would take them over Tannehill, I think. After that, you have in fact, not would I don't take them over Tannehill. I would probably take Teddy Bridgewater over all three of them, because Bridgewater just 2 years ago was showing that he was more a competent starter for Denver. Wasn't great or anything, and certainly last year was pretty bad with Miami. 5.4% turnover-worthy play rate, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, only 79 attempts, but still. But in 2021, ranked 12th in adjusted completion percentage, 3% turnover-worthy play rate, 13th, second in completion percentage over expected, 13th in EPA per dropback, 13th in success rate. I'm still more of a fan. Look, Bridgewater's never going to push the ball downfield consistently, but I think that he's still a safer bet than, I think his floor is higher than Winston's, but even than Mariota's. And so I think my option after Tyrod Taylor, my next option would be Teddy Bridgewater, although we'll see, where he's going. There were talks of him retiring and things like that. Now this name I'm going to throw out there just because Jet fans are going to mention it, but Josh Dobbs. Let me read you what his stats were before he was traded and after he was traded. Before he was traded, 71.2% adjusted completion percentage, 5.9 yards per attempt, 8 to 5 touchdown to interception ratio, 4.3% turnover worthy play rate. Weeks 9 to 14 after he was traded, 73.6% adjusted completion percentage, 5.9 yards per attempt, 5 to 5 touchdown to interception, and 4.5% turnover worthy play rate. Very, very similar numbers. So this idea that he fell off a cliff once he was traded, he just wasn't playing that well. 5.9 yards per attempt is not good for a backup quarterback. You want to get at least, if 7 is roughly average for a starting quarterback, you want to get to like at least 6.5 for a backup. 5.9 is pathetic. And so honestly, his numbers were very similar in the end to what he had done the year before in Tennessee. I don't know if anyone else had watched Tennessee. I don't remember which team it was against, but there was a primetime game that I watched where Josh Dobbs started. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy's not a quarterback in the NFL. Not just not a starting quarterback in the NFL. I remember thinking to myself, he's not a quarterback in the NFL. And I think he showed that, more clearly on display in his 4-pick game with the Vikings. But he ended up demoted to third-string quarterback even after Kirk Cousins was out for the season. So that kind of tells you what you need to know about Josh Dobbs. Now, Michael Nania explained why the Jets should not trade for Sam Howell. I mean, I think that would be the dumbest waste of a draft pick that the Jets could make. I mean, I guess if it was a 7th-round pick, why not? But like any other draft pick, Jets need all the draft capital they can get. They need their depth pieces. And Howell, the thing about Howell is people had went gaga over him because he was, for a number of weeks, he was among the leaders in passing yards. But the thing is, he was also by far among the leaders in pass attempts. His turnovers were ridiculously high. His sack rate was absurd, and it was not based just on the Washington offensive line. And then he was also, his yards per attempt weren't even that good. There was nothing about Sam Howell. There was a reason that when Brissett came in, Washington's offense looked much more competent. There was nothing about Sam Howell that the Jets should want. There's a reason that Washington is clearly going to look to replace him in the draft, or almost certainly. Be very surprising if they don't. And so, Sam Howell. Now, there are other names: Mitch Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Tyler Huntley, Mason Rudolph, all of them. No way. I mean, all the same thing. 5.9 yards per attempt for Trubisky. Darnold had a nice little run, but Darnold basically is good at 3-game samples. But that's about it. His issues have not gone away. I don't care if he ends up starting for any other team and playing well. Darnold is not. I would be very shocked if he becomes a Geno Smith and suddenly turns into a competent quarterback. Maybe for the 49ers, but that's about it. And so that's the situation with the backup quarterback. And so again, in my book, it's Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, then Gardner Minshew. Then I might even go Teddy Bridgewater, and then Mariota and Winston, and then from there Tannehill. That's my hierarchy for backup quarterbacks. I've heard people mention Andy Dalton. He's not getting released, and so that's the Jets backup quarterback situation. Moving on from that. Now, just a quick note: the NFL Combine's coming up, and apparently Robert Saleh's not going again. I don't think it's a big deal. He never goes. I don't know if I trust his talent evaluation anyway. The biggest thing is who is going to evaluate talent for the Jets. They currently don't have an assistant GM. They don't have a president of player development. They're missing a bunch of assistants. Teams keep plucking their guys one after another. So the question is, who's evaluating talent? I mean, it's perhaps maybe Joe Douglas can do a better job. But his draft, other than 2022 draft, a lot of his other draft scouting has been suspect. Now, Joe Tippmann showed some promise. If Will McDonald can take a leap in year 2, obviously that would go a long way towards helping his draft record. But still, hasn't really hit a lot in the later rounds, especially on offense. And so, it's interesting. Now, the other thing is I don't put so much stock into the NFL Combine, but one thing I do want to see is at certain positions where the Jets play on offense and on defense. They play a style that requires athleticism from their players. Still more of a zone-leaning team, even though they were much more balanced with Hackett than they had been with Mike LaFleur, but they're still a zone-leaning team. They cannot handle very unathletic offensive linemen, and that's why signing Laken Tomlinson was a weird choice from the outset. Tomlinson was notoriously not athletic. You can see it on his tape from San Francisco. And so it was surprising that the Jets would have signed him. So now you wonder, Douglas usually goes for guys with RAS, relative athletic scores, and, based off the combine. And so you wonder, just are the Jets going to be looking again for that athleticism? They took it with Will McDonald. They took it with Tippmann last year. They took it over John Michael Schmitz because Tippmann is the more athletic player in space, especially. Um, and now, speaking of Joe Tippmann, Michael Nania wrote an article the other day asking whether the Jets should play Joe Tippmann at guard or center. And I think the answer to this question is be very interesting. I would tend to lead towards guard because, as Michael pointed out, Tippmann played better as a guard, and guards tend to be paid more in the NFL because they are more important. They tend to go one-on-one a lot more. They're more important than centers. Plus, he had trouble with snapping, and if you could play well at guard anyway, get someone else who can snap the ball. Plus, Aaron Rodgers likes his veteran centers. The only issue I have here is if you want a mid-tier option that's not going to cost a ton, it is probably easier to find someone with fewer red flags at guard than at center. Because at center, really, you have Tyler Biadasz, who's a good run blocker, comes from Dallas. Also, you a little dubious about a run blocker from Dallas, where they have a history of really good run blocking. You have Lloyd Cushenberry, who PFF projects he's going to get $14.3 million per year. Jets can't afford that. You have Andre James from the Raiders, who may get a more reasonable contract because he suddenly broke out, but there is that red flag. They have a bunch of Raiders offensive linemen who all of a sudden broke out. The Jets don't have that great offensive line guru that the Raiders had, and for some reason let walk to the Giants. And so it's an interesting conundrum because I like Kevin Zeitler and James Hurst at guard. I think you know what you're getting with them. There's more stability. And so on the one hand, I think moving Tippmann to guard, he might actually be more valuable there. But on the other hand, they have to actually be able to get a center who could play the position. And so I might be on our Andre James because PFF said some good things about him. They said they let their all-pro center, Rodney Hudson, go to Arizona because they like James. They say he's a very smooth operator. And so if that's the case, it could be that the Jets should just sign him, whatever it's going to cost, because centers tend to cost less. But I could see them leaving him at center, especially because they drafted him there, and just letting him learn the position and then signing him a guard. Now, the last topic I wanted to just cover was Bryce Huff once more. He's going to come up in this whole offseason until even past. If they re-sign him, great. If they don't re-sign him, Jets fans are going to be livid. And so today, for the first time, we heard a Jets beat reporter say that the Jets are even going to try to re-sign him. Rich Cimini, he tweeted, he said, if the Jets want to use a franchise tag on defensive end Bryce Huff, it will cost $21.324 million per the NFL. It would be a surprise if they go that route. They will try to re-sign him before free agency starts. He should have a robust market, so it might be tough to meet his number. Now, I think it was Brad Spielberger from Over the Cap, who in PFF, who was speculating that Huff will want around $20 million per year. The Jets will want to pay him more. Forgot what number he said exactly, but around $16 million or $14-15 million. And so I think Huff's market is going to be in the $16 to $18 million range. I don't know if the Jets are going to be willing to give him that. The biggest question really is, are they going to be willing to give him the snaps that are worth that role? Now, if they keep Huff and JFM and John Franklin Myers and Will McDonald, it's going to be hard to make that space, especially because they insist on playing Michael Clemens a lot more snaps than he should. And so the thing is, if they do re-sign Huff, then I would say that they almost have to trade John Franklin Myers, at least clear up some cap space. You're giving Huff more like a 55% to 60% snap share. You're increasing Will McDonald to close to at least 50-55%. If you think 55% is too low, it kind of is, but the Jets played Carl Lawson 58% in 2022, and he was their starting edge rusher. So, the 55 to 60% range seems to be at least a reasonable guess for a starting edge rusher, even though Jermaine Johnson was a lot higher than that. I think he was at 66% for the season. And so if, Huff, it'll be very interesting to say. Now, Michael Nania pointed out something very interesting. The Jets' defensive DVOA in 2022. So they had overall negative 9.5%. Pass defense was negative 5.8%, and rush was negative 14%. 2023, overall negative 14.2%, right? Huff's snaps jumped from 16% to 42%. Their overall DVOA gets 5% better. Their pass defense DVOA goes to negative 17.5%, so it gets almost 12% better. And their rush DVOA gets a little bit worse to negative 10.5%. Still, first of all, their pass DVOA improved by 12%, and their rush only got worse by 3.5%. That's a huge difference. Second of all, especially because passing is so much more important than run defense, you would take that with Bryce Huff any day, even if his run defense is as bad as PFF says it is. And they gave him a 48 run defense grade, pretty bad. Statistically, the Jets' run defense was really bad with him on the field. Again, it's hard to isolate that. We'll have to watch a film to see how bad he really is. But even if he is as bad as PFF says, the Jets' defense is still better off. Because the thing is, other than Bryce Huff, the Jets don't really have a true edge rusher who can win one-on-one consistently. Jermaine Johnson had an excellent season, but if you watch a lot of what he did, he wins a lot through motor and through and through persistence. It's not that he didn't win snaps, he did, but he doesn't win quite as consistently off the edge and as quickly as Huff does. And so you have Johnson, you really need that complement on the other side to help. And obviously Quentin Williams eats up double teams in the middle, makes it easier for the Jets edge rushers. John Franklin Myers is more of an average edge rusher from the pass rusher from the edge. His strength on the edge is run defense. And so, obviously the Jets hope that Will McDonald can take a leap. And I remain very optimistic about him. I think he can be an excellent pass rusher and also more of a threat to get fumbles, to strip the ball, which is something he did a lot in college. He has those long arms, a very big reach. And so, but still, they really need Huff to be that he's really that table setter on the edge. And even if they start double teaming more often, he opens up everything else. And so the Jets definitely should re-sign him. I just wanted to add something, though. There are a lot of fans I've heard who said they should have re-signed him. They should have extended him last offseason. I did not hear too many fans say this last offseason, and the ones that did were not looking at the reality. The Jets were strapped for cash. Last offseason, they gave almost every single player I think every player that they signed, they added void years to their contract and started spreading out their money. They were really trying to spread their cap as thin as possible. Yeah, and yes, I know Rodgers took a pay cut, but that happened much later in the offseason. And so, trying to extend Bryce Huff at that point, they put the second-round tender on him. He had only played 16% of the snaps. Let's say they had increased him to 40% of the snaps. There was a decent chance that his numbers were going to go way down, especially if it wasn't in obvious pass rush situations. You could see on the way he rushes, he pins his ears back. If he wasn't able to pin his ears back the same way, there was a more than decent chance that he could have still been a good edge rusher, but one who was worth. What were they going to give him last offseason? Were they really going to give him a contract that made him paid? Like, obviously they weren't going to give him $16 million a year, but he, to a certain extent, would he have taken a contract at like $8 million a year? I'm not sure. He might have wanted to bet on himself. And so, it's easy to say UDFA, he probably would have. I'm not sure about that, and I don't know if it would have made sense for the Jets again. He was a pass rush specialist. He was seen that way. The Patriots decreased Josh Uche's snap this year, and he played a very similar role for the Patriots last year that Huff did. He's not a lot. Uche is not necessarily seen as a better pass rusher with more snaps, and therefore the fact that Huff did perform continued. It's also worth noting from week 10 to week 17, he had a 9.8% pressure rate. He had a crazy game against New England, but for most of the second half of the year, he kind of disappeared, which leads to questions about did his increased snap rate, not in the game, but over the course of a season, wear him down to a certain extent. I don't believe so. I still think he's worth re-signing, but it's worth noting that was a considerable concern, that players, as they play more snaps, sometimes become less effective. I think this is very much revisionist history to say that the Jets should have re-signed him or extended him last offseason. Now, to say that the Jets should have extended him at the bye week, I think that's an accurate statement. He was, we saw his worth getting higher and higher. If he hadn't ended up with 10 sacks, I have a feeling they probably could have extended him at cheaper than what it costs now, because now he has the actual sack numbers. Before that, he just had the pressures, but he didn't necessarily have the sacks. And so sacks get players paid, for better or for worse, in the NFL. Carl Lawson notwithstanding, people do make more when they sack the quarterback. Ending up with 10 sacks, he's going to get paid more. And so I think the Jets might have been better off trying to extend him at the bye week. One other thing I wanted to mention, just getting back to John Franklin Myers, some people think, okay, so re-sign Huff and move JFM inside. It's worth noting that JFM was dead average as a pass rusher inside this year. I think his pressure rate was 8.2%. It was exactly at the positional average. And so I don't, Quinton Jefferson was 11.7%, significantly better, top 10 in the league. I think that if the Jets do re-sign Huff, they should trade JFM, re-sign Quinton Jefferson, and get a run stuffer in the middle. There are always a lot of these, sort of single-dimensional, one-dimensional run stuffers available, Al Woods types, but a little younger and a little more athletic, available on the market. They're a lot of times available in the second wave of free agency. Also, the Jets could go for that. And so that's it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back with another episode of the Score Boord podcast. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to Jets X Factor. Read it at Jets X Factor online, and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.